Welcome to Whispers of the Night. This is Davis, your host for today's mystery. Tonight's mystery begins with a simple invitation to the countryside and a weekend that should have been peaceful, but one unexpected guest and one body beneath an ancient bridge turned the visit into something far darker than anyone imagined. Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching from. We love knowing how far our stories are reaching. Now, pour yourself a cup of coffee, get comfortable, and let's begin. Chapter 1. An invitation to Thorneberry. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped between a bill from my tailor and an advertisement for a miraculous hair tonic I had no intention of purchasing. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Bold, angular strokes that belonged to a man accustomed to command, Colonel Edward Waterford, late of His Majesty's 4th Regiment, and one of the finest officers I had served under during those grim years in France. Poirot, I said, looking up from my eggs. Do you remember my mentioning Colonel Waterford? My friend sat across from me, engaged in the delicate operation of dividing a perfectly soft-boiled egg with mathematical precision. He did not look up. The colonel who once commanded you to charge a German position, armed only with 3 men and a broken rifle. Yes, you have mentioned him precisely 14 times since our acquaintance began. I felt my face warm. Well, it was rather a close thing. And you emerged victorious. Natural element, you always do in these reminiscences. Poirot lifted a minuscule portion of egg to his lips, his magnificent mustaches bristling with satisfaction at the eggs. Perfect consistency. He's invited us both to his estate, I said, unfolding the letter. Thorneberry, near a village called Woodleigh Vale. Quiet countryside, good shooting, and he specifically mentions you. Poirot says he's heard of your detective work and would be honored to host the famous Hercule Poirot. Poirot set down his spoon with exquisite care. And when does the colonel require the presence of the famous Hercule Poirot? This coming Friday for the weekend. You wish to go, Moni? I confess the prospect appealed to me enormously. London had been particularly dreary that autumn, all fog and rain, and the same routine of club dinners and afternoon strolls. The thought of crisp country air, perhaps a day's shooting, and the chance to catch up with Waterford stirred something in me. I rather think I should like to. Yes. Poirot dabbed his lips with his napkin, folded it precisely, and smiled. Then we shall go. I have no pressing engagements. And the countryside in autumn, it has a certain melancholy beauty, does it not? Besides, Poirot grows restless without the stimulus of new faces, new places. There won't be any murders, old chap, I said, laughing. Just pleasant company and good food. Poirot's eyes gleamed with something I couldn't quite place. Let us hope you are correct, Hastings. Let us hope. The journey from London took us through landscapes that shifted from industrial gray to pastoral green. Poirot spent most of the train ride contemplating the passing scenery with unusual intensity, occasionally murmuring observations about soil quality and agricultural practices that I suspect he invented purely for his own amusement. At the village station, Colonel Waterford himself met us with a motor car and a hearty handshake that nearly lifted me off my feet. Hastings, by God, you haven't aged a day. This was untrue, but gratifying. A&M means Poirot. An honor, sir. An absolute honor. I followed your cases in the papers. Brilliant work. Brilliant. Poirot inclined his head graciously. You were most kind, Colonel. The drive to Thorneberry took us along narrow lanes bordered by hedgerows, already beginning to shed their leaves. The afternoon light held that peculiar golden quality of early October, illuminating the rolling hills that stretched away toward the horizon. In the distance, I glimpsed a stone bridge spanning what must be the river Waterford had mentioned in his letter. That's the Widow's Arch, Waterford said, following my gaze. Local landmark. Dates back to the 14th century or so. They claim. Bit of a grim history. Several suicides over the years. Village. Folk won't cross it after dark. Superstition, I asked. Or common sense? Waterford replied. The stones get slippery in the fog, and we get plenty of fog in these parts. But the locals prefer their ghost stories more romantic than simple carelessness, I suppose. Poirot said nothing, but I noticed his eyes lingered on the bridge. As we passed, Thorneberry itself rose. Before us moments later, a handsome Georgian manor of greystone softened by climbing ivy. The ground stretched in every direction, manicured lawns giving way to wilder parkland, and beyond that, dense woodland that seemed to press close despite the open sky. Inside we were greeted by our hosts. Harold Thorneberry proved to be a man of perhaps 50, with a quiet demeanor of someone who had learned to speak softly and carry himself with care. His handshake was gentle, almost apologetic. Welcome to Thorneberry, gentlemen. I hope your journey wasn't too tiresome. Not at all, I assured him. Lovely. Countryside, we think so. My wife will join us shortly. She's been resting. Margaret suffers from headaches, I'm afraid. The change in weather affects her. As if summoned by his words, a woman appeared at the top of the staircase. Margaret Thorneberry descended with the careful grace of someone moving through water. Each step, clear throat, measured and deliberate. She was beautiful. There could be no doubt of that. Fair hair, delicate features, eyes of remarkable clarity. Yeah, but there was something fragile in her bearing, a brittleness that made me think of porcelain held too close to flame. Miss Poirot, she said, extending her hand. Captain Hastings, how kind of you to come. Her voice carried a tremor I couldn't quite account for. Nerves, perhaps, or simply the effects of the headache her husband had mentioned. Yet, when she glanced toward the windows, toward the direction of that ancient stone bridge, her fingers tightened briefly on the banister. Poirot bowed over her hand with courtly precision. The pleasure is entirely ours, madam. That evening, as I unpacked in my comfortable bedroom, overlooking the gardens, I reflected on what a pleasant weekend this promised to be. Good company, fine surroundings, and the prospect of complete relaxation. I should have known better. The house itself seemed to whisper secrets as darkness fell, and somewhere in the night I heard the sound of wind moving through bare branches, carrying with it the faint, persistent smell of the river. Thorneberry held its breath, waiting. Chapter 2. The gentleman from London. Morning. Brought an unwelcome surprise. I came down to breakfast, expecting the quiet gathering Waterford had promised. Perhaps a discussion of the day's shooting prospects, or idle conversation about estate matters. Instead, I found the dining room charged with an atmosphere I could only describe as electric. Margaret Thorneberry sat frozen before an untouched plate of kippers. Harold stood behind her chair, one hand resting protectively on its back. Waterford's jovial expression had vanished, replaced by something harder. Even the young maid pouring coffee moved with exaggerated care, as though the slightest sound might shatter something fragile. Poirot observed all this from his seat by the window, buttering toast with the concentration of a surgeon preparing for an operation. Ah, Hastings, Waterford said. Sleep well. Perfectly, thank you. I took my seat. Has something happened? We have an unexpected guest, Harold said. His voice remained level, but his knuckles showed white against the dark wood of his wife's chair. Mr. Leonard Braxby arrived at 7 o'clock this morning from London. Braby. I searched my memory and found nothing. Is he a friend of yours? Hardly. The word came from Margaret, sharp as broken glass. She looked up and I saw dark circles beneath her eyes. Mr. Braxby purchased the land adjoining our estate several months ago. We've had no direct dealings with him until now, he claims. Business regarding boundary disputes. Harold added. Something about an old survey map showing discrepancies in the property lines. At 7 in the morning, Waterford's tone suggested what he thought of such timing, without so much as a letter of introduction. The dining room door opened. A man entered with the confidence of someone who had never questioned his welcome anywhere. Leonard Braxby was perhaps 45, dressed with London precision, a suit cut by-in expensive tailor, shoes polished to mirrors, gold cufflinks catching the morning light. His face was handsome in a calculated way, all sharp planes and practiced expressions. When he smiled, which he did immediately upon seeing us, it never reached his eyes. Gentlemen, I do apologize for intruding on your breakfast. His voice carried the smooth warmth of good brandy and about as much genuine feeling. Leonard Braxby, I've taken the liberty of accepting Mr. Thornberry's most gracious invitation to join you. I glanced at Harold, whose expression suggested he had issued no such invitation. Miss Braxby, Poirot said, setting down his butter knife with precision. You are perhaps a solicitor. Braxby's smile widened. How perceptive. Yes, I practice law in London. Property matters, primarily. And you are Poirot. Something flickered in Braby's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or calculation. The detective. How fascinating. What brings you to our quiet corner of England? I am a guest of Colonel Waterford, Poirot said. As it seems, are you? Oh, I wouldn't call myself a guest precisely. More of a neighbor with pressing business. Braxby helped himself to eggs from the sideboard with an ease that bordered on presumption. I've been reviewing old records of the Thornberry estate. Quite illuminating. Really fascinating what one discovers in dusty archives. Connections between families, old scandals, forgotten debts. Margaret's teacup rattled against its saucer. Harold's hand moved to her shoulder. The boundary dispute, Harold said, each word precise. Perhaps we might discuss it in my study after breakfast. Of course, Braxby settled into a chair. Though I confess the boundaries are only part of what I hope to address. There are other matters, historical matters. I've uncovered quite a story about this area. The Thornberry family features prominently. I'm considering writing a monograph on local history. Such interesting connections, too. Certain tragic events. The silence that followed pressed down like a physical weight. How industrious of you, Poirot said. His voice remained pleasant, but something in his posture had changed. You have an interest in history, then? Oh, passionate, especially when history intersects with the present. One never knows what old stories might prove valuable. Braxby spread marmalade on toast with deliberate strokes. To the right people, of course. Those who prefer certain chapters remain closed. I looked to Waterford, hoping for enlightenment, but his face had gone stony. Margaret rose abruptly, napkin falling to the floor. Excuse me, she said. My headache has returned. She left before anyone could respond. Harold remained standing, torn between following his wife and maintaining propriety before his guests. Your wife seems unwell, Braxby observed. I do hope it's nothing serious. Nothing brought on by worry. Perhaps. That's enough, Harold said. The quiet man I'd met yesterday had vanished, replaced by something with teeth. You'll confine your comments to business matters, Braxby. But I am discussing business, my dear Thorneberry. The most important business of all, the careful management of one's reputation. Don't you agree, Miss Poirot? A man's good name is worth more than gold. Poirot dabbed his lips with his napkin. It depends perhaps on how one defines good name and what one is willing to do to preserve it. Precisely. Braxby pointed his knife at Poirot like a conductor's baton. You Understand perfectly. Preservation requires vigilance and sometimes shall we say an arrangement between gentlemen. Harold's chair scraped back. My study now. Braxby rose with infuriating leisure. Of course, though, I should mention I'd like a private word with Mrs. Thornberry as well. Just a brief chat. I'm sure she'll find my proposals quite reasonable. Absolutely not, Harold said. Oh, I think she'll want to hear what I have to say. Braxby paused at the door, particularly regarding that unfortunate incident 16 years ago, the drowning. Edmund Thornberry, wasn't it? Your brother, I believe. Such a tragedy. And the woman he'd been seeing. Now, what was her maiden name? He left the question hanging in the air like smoke. Harold's face had gone the color of old parchment. He followed Braxby from the room without another word, and I heard their footsteps fade down the corridor. Waterford released a breath I hadn't realized he'd been holding. That man is poison. Poirot said quietly. He stared at his plate, but his eyes saw something else entirely. Poison of a most refined variety. The kind that destroys not the body, but the soul. What was he talking about? I asked. Edmund Thornberry, a drowning. Ancient history, Waterford said. Before my time here. But villages have long memories. Hastings. Very long. Memories indeed. Poirot rose from the table, moving to the window that overlooked the grounds. In the distance, morning mist still clung to the river, wreathing the stone arches of the Widow's Arch in gray veils. Hastings, he said, I think perhaps that our quiet weekend has become something else. Entirely. I joined him at the window. The bridge stood silent in the autumn morning, ancient and patient. You think there will be trouble? I think. Poirot said that trouble has already arrived. It wore a good suit and smiled, while delivering threats. The question now is not if something will happen, mon ami. The question is how many people will be destroyed before it does. The mist shifted, revealing the bridge completely for a moment before obscuring it once more. Somewhere in the house, a door closed with finality. The weekend had begun. Chapter 3. Death at Dawn. The scream tore through the morning like fabric ripping. I bolted upright in bed, momentarily disoriented. Gray light filtered through the curtains. Dawn or near enough. The sound came again, more distinct now, a man's voice rough with shock. I threw on my dressing gown and hurried into the corridor. Poirot emerged from his room simultaneously, fully dressed despite the hour. How the man managed it remained one of life's great mysteries. That came from outside, I said. The river, Poirot replied. Quickly. Hastings. We descended the stairs to find the household in chaos. Harold stood in the entrance hall pulling on a coat. Waterford appeared behind us, still in shirt sleeves. Margaret had not emerged. What's happened? Waterford demanded. Tom Garrett. He farms the South Fields, Harold said. His voice shook. He's found something by the bridge. Someone. We needed no further explanation. The walk to Widow's Arch took perhaps 10 minutes, though it felt like hours. The morning mist had thickened overnight, transforming the landscape into something from a fever dream. Trees loomed out of the whiteness like watching sentinels. The path beneath our feet, slick with dew, required careful navigation. Tom Garrett stood at the base of the bridge, hands gripping his cap. A man of perhaps 60, weathered by outdoor work. He looked 20 years older in that moment. Mr. Thornberry, he said. I didn't know what to do. I was heading to check the sheep when I saw him lying there. I thought maybe he'd had too much to drink. Fell asleep rough-like. But then I got closer and where? Harold asked. Garrett pointed beneath the bridge's central arch. The body lay sprawled on the rocks where the river ran shallow, one arm flung out, as though reaching for something. Even from a distance, I recognized the expensive suit, now torn and muddy. Leonard Braxby would issue no more veiled threats. Poirot moved forward with surprising swiftness, picking his way across the stones with the care of a cat. I followed less gracefully, nearly losing my footing twice. "Do not touch anything," Poirot commanded. Braxby lay face up, eyes open to the indifferent sky. His skull showed a terrible depression on the left side, dark with blood. The rocks beneath him bore witness to the impact. One particular stone, larger than the rest, glistened red in the weak morning light. "Fell from the bridge," Waterford said. "From behind us. Must have slipped in the fog." Poirot crouched beside the body, his face intent. He studied the wound, the position of the limbs, the scatter of disturbed stones. His fingers hovered over a walking stick lying several feet from the corpse, ebony with a silver handle monogrammed LB. Even from where I stood, I could see dark stains on the silver handle. "How far is that stick from the body?" "Hastings." I paced off. 8 feet perhaps. Interesting. And I pass. A man falls from a bridge, yet his walking stick lands 3 times his body length away. Could have bounced. I suggested perhaps. Poirot's tone suggested he thought nothing of the sort. He moved to examine the bridge itself, peering over the stone parapet. "The height here is considerable, 30 feet at least. The stones get treacherous when wet," Harold said. His voice carried a hollowness that troubled me, especially in fog. "Everyone knows to avoid the bridge after dark. Yet Newby walked here last night," Poirot said. "At what hour, I wonder?" "I couldn't say," Harold replied. "Too quickly, I thought. Someone must fetch Dr. Keene," Waterford said. "And we'll need the constable. Garrett, can you ride to the village?" "Aye, sir." The farmer looked grateful for an excuse to leave. He hurried back toward his farm with the gait of a man fleeing something. Pooh continued his examination. He studied the approaches to the bridge from both sides, occasionally stopping to peer at the ground. The mist complicated everything, turning familiar landmarks strange and distances deceptive. "No footprints," I observed. "The paths, too hard-packed. We most convenient for someone, perhaps." Poirot returned to the body, his green eyes taking in details I couldn't fathom. "The blow to the head. You see how it is angled, Hastings?" I looked, though the sight turned my stomach. "From above, I should think. Consistent with a fall, or with being struck from behind before the fall." Poirot straightened. "Consider the walking stick. Consider its distance from the body. Consider also this." He indicated a mark on Braxby's head above the main wound, a smaller contusion barely visible beneath the hair. "2 injuries?" I asked precisimal. "One might be from the fall, but 2 most suggestive. Dr. Alastair Keene arrived within the hour, riding a sturdy cob that looked as gray and gloomy as its master. The doctor was a spare man of 50-odd years, with the face of someone perpetually disappointed by humanity. "Leonard Braxby," he said, viewing the body without apparent emotion. "Can't say. I'm surprised." "You knew him?" Waterford asked. "Knew of him. He consulted me yesterday about purchasing property near the surgery. Wanted to know about the village, the people. Asked questions that had nothing to do with real estate. Keene knelt beside the corpse with practiced efficiency. Asked specifically about the Thornberrys, about old families, about scandals." Harold's face, already pale, went bloodless. Keene performed his examination with brisk competence. "Skull fracture severe. Death would have been rapid. Time of death difficult to say precisely with the cold and the damp, but I'd estimate between 11 last night and 1 this morning. Can you determine if he fell or was struck?" Pooh asked. Keene looked up sharply. "You suspect foul Play. I suspect nothing. I observe only what is before me. The doctor returned, his attention to the wound. The injury is consistent with impact against these rocks, but this secondary contusion here, that's less easily explained by a simple fall. He might have struck his head. Twice as he went down caught different surfaces or Waterford prompted or someone hit him before he fell. Keene stood wiping his hands on a handkerchief. I'll need to examine him properly at the surgery, but if you're asking my preliminary opinion, Miss Poirot, I'd say this death raises questions. That is all I require to hear, Poirot said. The constable arrived shortly after, a young man named Davies, earnest and overwhelmed. He took statements from all of us, wrote everything in a notebook with laborious care, and declared it a tragic accident pending the coroner's examination. Happens more than you'd think, he said. Just last year old Mrs. Penworthy slipped on these very stones, broke her hip. Bridge is a menace in fog, yet people continue to use it. Rowe observed. Shortest route between the village and Thorneberry. Cut 15 minutes. Off the walk. Davies closed his notebook. I'll need to ask everyone at the manor about their whereabouts last night. Formality, you understand? Naturelmo, Poirot said. We are entirely at your disposal. The walk back to Thorneberry passed in silence. The mist had begun to lift, revealing the estate in harsh morning light. It looked smaller, somehow less grand. The windows reflected nothing. At the entrance, Dora the maid met us, wringing her hands in her apron. Is it true, sir? She asked Harold. Is Mr. Braxby dead? I'm afraid so, Dora. Oh. She looked down. I'm sorry, sir. That's terrible, that is. But her voice carried no conviction, and when she glanced up, her eyes held something that might have been relief. Inside, Margaret waited in the drawing room. She sat by the window, hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing. When Harold entered, she turned her face toward him. Is he gone? She asked. Yes, Harold said. She closed her eyes. A single tear traced down her cheek. But whether from grief or something else entirely, I could not say. Pooh stood in the doorway, watching them both with an expression I had learned to recognize over our years of friendship. The little gray cells had begun their work. Chapter 4. Secrets of the Past. Poirot began his inquiries that afternoon with the methodical precision of a surgeon selecting instruments. Constable Davies had established himself in the library, taking statements with earnest determination. Poirot, meanwhile, had requested the use of the morning room, a smaller, more intimate space where, as he explained to Harold, people might feel less constrained by formality. You wish to question my household? Harold asked. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He had aged a decade since breakfast. If you permit, Poirot said. I ask only what the constable does not think to ask, the small details. They often illuminate what the large facts obscure. And if I refuse, then, naturally I respect your wishes. But I think, Mr. Thornberry, that you wish the truth discovered, whatever that truth may be. Harold's laugh held no humor. Do I'm no longer certain. He left without another word. Dr. Keene arrived. First, summoned from his preliminary examination of the body, he settled into the chair Poirot indicated with the air of a man expecting unpleasantness. The constable has already questioned me, he said. Ah, but the constable asks about facts, Poirot replied. I am interested in impressions. You knew Monsieur Braxby. I met him yesterday once, briefly. Yet you said you were not surprised by his death. Keene's mouth tightened. Men like Braxby make enemies. It's an occupational hazard of being a professional vulture. Strong words, doctor. Accurate words. He came to my surgery yesterday afternoon, claimed he wanted to discuss property, but his questions had nothing to do with land values. He asked about the Thornberrys, about old families in the area, about the drowning 16 years ago. Poirot leaned forward slightly. And what did you tell him? Nothing. I told him village history didn't interest me, and showed him the door. Keen's jaw worked. He laughed, said he'd already confirmed what he needed from parish records, said some people would pay handsomely to keep certain connections quiet. He mentioned payment, not directly. He had a talent for implication. Keen pulled out his pipe, then seemed to remember where he was and put it away. I asked him to leave. He said he looked forward to our next conversation. There wasn't going to be one. You disliked him intensely. I despised him. There's a difference. Keen met Poirot's gaze without flinching. I won't pretend grief I don't feel. The world is better without Leonard Braxby, but I didn't kill him. Where were you last night between 11 and 1? Walking. I often walk at night. Insomnia, chronic condition. I took the south road toward the village around 10. Stopped at the church, spoke with Reverend Olsworth for perhaps 20 minutes. He'll confirm it. Then walked home, arrived around midnight. You did not go near the bridge. The south road runs nowhere near the bridge. Poirot. Different direction entirely. Poirot made a note. This drowning 16 years ago. Edmund Thornberry. What do you know of it? Keen's expression shuddered. I'd only just arrived in Woodleigh Vale. 17 years ago now, fresh from medical school, full of ideals about country practice. Villages talk. The story is that Edmund Thornberry drowned in the river one autumn night. Drunk most likely. Wild boy by all accounts. Harold's younger brother. And was there a woman involved? There are always women involved in such stories. Keen stood. If you're looking for scandal, sighed Poirot, you'll find it in every family. The question is whether ancient history has anything to do with last night's death. That, Pooh said gently, is precisely the question. After Keen departed, Poirot sat in silence for several moments. Then he sent for Nigel Prothero. The estate manager entered with visible reluctance. He was perhaps 35, with the restless energy of a man perpetually dissatisfied with his station. His handshake, when Poirot offered it, was damp. I've already spoken with the constable, Prothero said. Of course, I merely seek clarification on certain points. Poirot gestured to a chair. You managed the Thornberry estate for 7 years now. A position of considerable responsibility. I do my duty. Poirot's knee bounced. I'm good at my job, if that's what you're implying. I imply nothing. I understand. Monsieur Braxby purchased land you hope to acquire. The knees stopped bouncing. Who told you that? Is it not true? It's true. I made an offer on that property. Harold knew I wanted it. Good farmland. Access to the river would have increased the estate's value considerably, but Braxby outbid me. Prothero's voice turned bitter. Paid twice what it was worth just to spite me. How did he know of your interest? How does poison know where to spread? The man made it his business to discover what people wanted, then take it from them. Yet I am told the land dispute was settled in your favor. Prothero blinked. What? The boundary disagreement in Surrey. Claim brought him here. My understanding is that he had conceded the matter. Yes, he had. Prothero's confusion appeared genuine. Sent a letter 3 days ago. Agreed the old survey maps were correct, that the boundary stood as marked. I thought it was a trick. Men like him don't surrender unless they have acquired something more valuable than land. Poirot suggested. Information, perhaps. I don't know anything about that. Where were you last night? In my cottage alone. Reading and then sleeping. Not much of an alibi, I grant you. Poirot's hands twisted together. But I had no reason to harm Braxby. The land matter was settled. I was satisfied. Were you? Poirot's eyes held him. Or were you merely waiting to see what other game he was playing? Poirot stood abruptly. I've said all I'm going to say unless you're going to formally accuse me. I accuse no one, monsieur. I merely seek understanding. After Poirot left, I entered from where I'd been standing in the corridor. Well, I asked. Both men disliked Bracksby intensely. Poirot said. Both had opportunity. Both have motives that dissolve upon examination. Yet, motives can be layered. Nespa like an onion. Remove one skin and find another beneath. What about the woman Key mentioned? The one involved with Edmund Thorneberry. Ah, Hastings. There you strike at the heart of it. Poirot stood moving to the window. Outside, Margaret Thornberry walked in. The garden, moving between the rows. Bushes like a ghost. I think it is time we heard from the lady herself. But before we could arrange it, Dora appeared at the door, her young face pale. Begging your pardon, sir, she said to Poirot. But there's someone here asking for you. A lady from London says her name is Caroline Bracksby, says she's the dead man's sister. Poirot's eyebrows rose. Indeed, most interesting. Show her in, if you please. The woman who entered moved with brutal precision. She was perhaps 40, dressed in mourning, black that looked hastily assembled. Her face bore a resemblance to her brother's, the same sharp planes. But where his had been calculating, hers was merely weary. Miss Poirot, she said, I've come from London on the afternoon train. The constable told me you were investigating Leonard's death. I have information you'll need to hear. Please sit. Mademoiselle, it's Mrs. Bracksby, widow. These past 5 years, she sat with her back rigid. My brother and I were not close. I won't pretend grief, but I knew his business methods. I know what brought him here, and that was blackmail. Pure and simple. Caroline Bracksby opened her handbag and withdrew a ledger, leather-bound and worn. Leonard kept records. He always kept records. This is his private book. I found it among his things in London. He left it when he came here. Careless of him, she placed it on the table between them. I came because whoever killed my brother, and someone did kill him, I'm certain of that, they were likely one of his victims. Someone driven beyond endurance. Her voice cracked slightly. Someone who deserved better than to be hunted by a man like Leonard. Poirot opened the ledger. Page after page of names, dates, and cryptic notations. Near the back I saw it. Margaret Ashford. Query connection to E. Thornberry. Drowning. Pursue. One page had been torn out. The page that would have followed. Chapter 5. The conundrum deepens. The ledger lay open on the table between us like an accusation. Caroline Bracksby had departed for the village inn, leaving behind a silence that pressed against my ears. Poirot turned pages with delicate fingers, studying each entry with the concentration he usually reserved for particularly complex crossword puzzles. Hastings, he said at length, what do you observe? I leaned closer. The handwriting was precise, almost mechanical. Names, dates, amounts. Some entries had been marked with a small cross, others with a circle. A record of his victims. I said the crosses might indicate those who paid exactment, and the circles, those who refused or those not yet approached. See here, sir. William Marchmont circled. Lord Deo circled, but Mrs. Elenina Pritchard crossed out, and beside her name a sum. £500. Good Lord, for what? Her husband's gambling debts, according to this notation. Debts that would have ruined them socially. Poirot's finger moved down the page. Each entry tells a story of desperation purchased at a price. But the page that's missing would have been about Margaret Thornberry. Perhaps, or perhaps about something more dangerous. Still, Poirot closed the ledger. We must speak with Madame Thornberry. But first I wish to reconstruct the events of last evening with precision. Come. We found Harold in his study, staring at papers he wasn't reading. He looked up at our entrance with the expression of a man expecting execution. Monsieur Thornberry Pooh said, I must ask you about last night. You will find it uncomfortable, but the truth it must be established. I've told the constable everything. You have told him facts. I ask now for the sequence. Poirot settled into the chair opposite. At what time did Miss Braxby leave this house? Harold's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. Around 10, perhaps a quarter. He'd been in the drawing room after dinner. When he left, he said he'd take a walk before returning to the inn. He lodged in the village. Yes, at the King's Arms. Yet he walked toward the bridge, not the village. I don't know. Why? Don't you? Poirot's voice remained gentle. Your wife, where was she at this time? In her room. She'd retired early with a headache. Are you certain? The silence stretched. Harold's face had gone gray. Monsieur Thornberry, Poirot said, the truth will emerge. It always does. Better it comes from you than from others. Margaret went out. The words came like stones pulled from a wound. I heard her door close around 11 o'clock. I went to check. Her room was empty. Her cloak was gone. And what did you do? I waited 20 minutes, 30. She didn't return. Harold's voice broke. I went to look for her. I knew where she'd gone. I knew he'd asked to meet her. Braxby requested this meeting. Not in so many words. At breakfast, when he spoke about private conversations about history, Margaret understood. After he left, she came to me, said he'd left a note in her room, said he'd be at the bridge at 11 if she wished to discuss terms. Terms, Pooh repeated, for his silence, for his lies. Harold stood abruptly, pacing to the window. That's what makes it unbearable. Edmund's drowning was an accident. A stupid, tragic accident. My brother was drunk, stumbled, fell into the river in the dark. Margaret had nothing to do with it. But Braxby claimed to have evidence, suggesting otherwise. Claimed he could connect her to Edmund in a way that would imply he couldn't finish. Murder. Pooh replied. He would claim she had murdered your brother. It's absurd, monstrous. But he had documents or claimed to have them. Letters, he said. Witnesses, all lies, I'm certain, but enough to destroy her reputation, to destroy both of us. So she went to meet him. I found her on the path returning from the bridge. She was crying, shaking. She said Braxby had laughed at her, said the price for his silence was more than we could afford, that he'd publish his findings within the week. Unless Harold turned back to face us. She wouldn't tell me what he demanded, only that she couldn't give it. What time was this? 11, perhaps 20 to 12. And then Harold's jaw worked. I told her to go inside to wait for me. I walked to the bridge. The admission hung in the air like smoke. You confronted him, Poirot said. I intended to. Yes. And did you? He was there, on the bridge, leaning against the parapet, smoking a cigar as though he hadn't just tormented my wife. Harold stopped, started again. I hit him. With what? His own walking stick. It was leaning against the stone. I grabbed it and struck him once across the back of the head. He fell to his knees, stunned. I dropped the stick and ran. I thought I had merely injured him, knocked him unconscious. Perhaps I didn't. His voice cracked. I didn't push him from the bridge. I swear it. What time was this? Just before midnight. The church clock struck as I reached the house. Poirot sat very still. And you told no one? Only Margaret. She was waiting in the hall. I told her what I'd done. She wanted to go back to help him, but I forbade it. I thought if we waited until morning, claimed ignorance. He laughed. bitterly. I'm not accustomed to deception, Monsieur Poirot. I'm rather bad at it. Where's the walking stick now? By the body where it fell. No, Poirot said the walking stick was found 8 feet from where Monsieur Braxby landed. If you dropped it where you struck him on the bridge, how did it travel to those rocks below? Harold stared at him. I don't know. Perhaps it rolled. Perhaps. Someone else moved it. Poirot finished. Or, perhaps Messiah Braxby, dazed and injured, attempted to rise. Perhaps he picked up his stick, staggered and fell. Then I killed him, Harold whispered. My blow caused his death. Or his own carelessness in attempting to rise too quickly caused his death. Or someone else came after you and finished what you began. Poirot stood. The sequence of events remains unclear. I must speak with your wife. She's fragile, Monsieur Poirot. This has nearly destroyed her. I will be gentle, but she holds a piece of this puzzle that I require. We found Margaret in the conservatory, sitting among the ferns and orchids that thrived in the humid warmth. She looked like a figure from a painting, pale, ethereal, already half departed from the world. Mrs. Thorneberry, Poirot said, I must ask you about last night. Harold has told you. Her voice was barely audible. He has told me his part. I need yours. She looked up then, and I saw something fierce behind the fragility. What do you wish to know? What Monsieur Braxby said to you at the bridge? His exact words, if you please. He said he had proof. Letters I'd written to Edmund. Love letters. Her hands twisted in her lap. I did write to him foolish romantic things. I was 18. I thought she stopped. It doesn't matter what I thought. Edmund drowned and I married Harold and I put it all behind me, or tried to. These letters, they still exist. Leonard claimed he'd found them among Edmund's things. Papers kept by the family's old solicitor. He said they were dated the night Edmund died. Said they could be read to suggest I'd arranged to meet Edmund at the river. That combined with Edmund's death. Her voice broke. He said any magistrate would consider it suspicious. That at minimum I'd be called to inquest. That the scandal would destroy us. What did he want? Money. At first. £10,000. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. We don't have £10,000. The estate barely breaks even. When I told him, he said there were other arrangements we could make. He looked at me in a way that made my skin crawl. I ran. You left him alive? Yes. Standing on the bridge, laughing at me. What time? It must have been 2011 perhaps. 25. I ran most of the way back. Poo-paced. Among the ferns. And you saw no one else. Heard nothing. Nothing. Only the fog and the river and my own footsteps. She looked at us both. Did Harold kill him? Tell me the truth. Your husband struck him, Poirot said. But whether that blow caused his death, that, madam, is the conundrum we must solve. Margaret closed her eyes. A single tear traced down her cheek. Outside, the afternoon light was fading. The bridge would soon be swallowed by darkness. Again, keeping its secrets. Chapter 6. The Little Gray Cells Speak. That evening, Poirot requested we all gather in the library. The room held a peculiar tension, as though the very air had contracted. Harold sat beside Margaret, her hand clasped in his. Waterford stood by the fireplace, his soldier's posture rigid. Dr. Keene had been summoned from the village along with Constable Davies. Caroline Braxby sat apart from the others, her black dress making her seem insubstantial in the lamplight. Even young Dora had been asked to attend, hovering nervously near the door. Poirot stood before the assembled company, his hands clasped behind his back. For a long moment he said nothing, merely observing each face with those remarkable green eyes. Madame Mesher, he began at last. We are here because a man died. Leonard Braxby fell from the widow's arch bridge and broke his skull upon the stones below. The question before us is simple. Was this an accident or was it murder? Harold has confessed to striking him, Waterford said. His voice was heavy. Surely that answers your question. Does it? Poirot turned to Harold. You struck Messiah Braxby with his own walking stick. One blow to the back of their head. He fell to his knees. You dropped the stick and fled. Sarked. Yes. Harold's voice was barely audible. And you, Madame Thornberry, you left Mr. Braxby alive on the bridge at approximately 11. I did. Then we have established two facts. First, that Ms. Braxby was alive at 11 when Madame departed. Second, that Muse Harold struck him shortly before midnight. Poirot began to pace, his steps measured. But here we encounter our first difficulty, the walking stick. He paused, letting the words settle. The walking stick was found 8 feet from the body. Not on the bridge where I'm sure Harold dropped it. Not beside the body, where it might have fallen with its owner. 8 feet distant. How does this occur? Perhaps it bounced, Davies suggested, from a height of 30 feet, striking multiple rocks on the way down. The stick shows no damage consistent with such treatment, nor Messier. The stick moved because someone moved it. Either Monsieur Braxby himself after receiving the blow, or he let the alternative hang unspoken, or someone else was there. Dr. Keene said quietly. Primero stopped his pacing. Consider the medical evidence, Dr. Keene. You noted 2 injuries to the head, Nesper. I did. 1 severe fracture consistent with the fall. 1 smaller contusion. That could have preceded it. Could have. Or did. Keene hesitated. The blow patterns suggest the smaller injury came first, but I cannot state with absolute certainty. You need not the little gray cells. They provide certainty where medical science cannot. Poirot moved to the table where the walking stick now lay, retrieved from the scene by the constable. This stick bears traces of blood. The amount is small. A surface wound perhaps, or a glancing blow, not enough to cause death. Then Harold didn't kill him, Margaret said. Hope flickered in her voice. Ah, but that is not quite accurate, madam. Your husband struck a blow that stunned Miss Braxby. What happened next? That is the true question. Poirot picked up the stick, weighing it in his hands. Imagine, if you will, the scene. Messier Braxby, dazed but conscious, on his knees upon the bridge. His attacker has fled. What does he do? He tries to get up, I said. Exactment, Hastings. He reaches for his stick to steady himself. He rises, unsteady, disoriented. The fog is thick. The stones are wet. He staggers and he falls. The room was silent. I could hear the clock ticking on the mantelpiece. So it was an accident after all, Waterford said. The blow caused him to lose his balance. But Harold didn't push him. That would be the simple answer. Poirot agreed. The comfortable answer. But Hercule Poirot does not accept simple answers when the facts whisper otherwise. He turned to face Harold directly. Monsieur Thornberry, when you struck Braxby, where precisely did he fall? Near the center of the bridge by the parapet and the walking stick. Where did you drop it? Right there beside him. Then, how? Poirot asked, his voice sharp as a blade. Did both Mr. Braxby and his walking stick end up directly beneath the center arch of the bridge? If he fell where you left him, his body would have struck the water below the parapet, not the rocks beneath the arch. The geometry, it does not work as not. Harold's face had gone chalk white. I don't understand. No. Then permit me to explain. Poirot set down the stick with deliberate care. Mr. Braxby did not fall from where you struck him. He moved or was moved to the center of the bridge. Perhaps he staggered there himself, disoriented. Or perhaps someone helped him. You're suggesting someone pushed him. After Harold left, Waterford demanded. I am suggesting, Poirot said, that the sequence of events is more complex than a simple assault followed by an accidental fall. I am suggesting that 3 people were on or near that bridge last night. Madame Thornberry, who left at 11, Monsieur Thornberry, who struck the blow at midnight, and one other. Who? Harold's voice cracked. Poirot's gaze swept the room, touching each face in turn. That is what the little gray cells must determine. Who had motive? Who had opportunity? Who stood to gain from Monsieur Braxby's death? We all did. Dr. Keene said. His voice was flat. Everyone he touched, everyone he threatened. You could fill this room 3 times over with people who wanted him dead. Ah, but wanting and doing, these are different things. No. Poirot moved to stand before the fireplace. Consider what we know. Mrs. Braxby was a blackmailer. His ledger shows many victims, but only one person tore out a page from that ledger. Only one person wished to hide specific evidence. Caroline Braxby stirred the page about Margaret Thornberry, perhaps, or perhaps about someone else, whose connection to the Thornberry family would prove devastating if revealed. Poirot's eyes gleamed. You see, I have made inquiries. I have spoken with the vicar. I have examined parish records. I have learned something most interesting about the night Edmund Thornberry drowned 16 years ago. The clock chimed the hour. 9 bells, deep and resonant. There was a witness, Poirot said into the silence that followed. Someone who saw Edmund Thornberry the night he died. Someone who saw him with a young woman by the river. Someone who never came forward, who kept that secret all these years until Leonard Braby discovered it. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. No, madam, the witness was not you. You were not there when Edmund died, but someone was someone who has lived with that knowledge, who has watched you suffer under false guilt, who has remained silent. Poirot turned. Is it not so, Dr. Keene? The doctor's face was stone. I don't know what you're talking about. No. Then why did your hand shake when Mrs. Braxby's death was announced? Why did you volunteer so quickly that you despised him? Why did you ensure we knew of your alibi before we asked for it? Poirot's voice was gentle now, almost sympathetic. You were there 16 years ago. You saw something, and Braxby discovered what you saw. You're guessing, Keene said, but his voice lacked conviction. I am deducing there is a difference. Poirot clasped his hands. But I confess, I do not yet know the full truth. That, Dr. Keene, only you can provide. What did you see that night? What secret did Braxby hold over you? The doctor's composure cracked like ice under pressure. His hands gripped the arms of his chair. I was walking, he said. His voice came from somewhere distant. I often walked at night even then. I just arrived in the village that summer. Young, newly qualified, full of idealism about country practice. I heard voices by the river. Edmund Thornberry drunk and raving at a woman, but not Margaret. Ashford. Margaret gasped. Who? Harold demanded. Keene looked at him with something like pity. Your mother. Harold. Edmund was threatening to expose an affair she'd had years before to ruin her reputation, to destroy your father. She was pleading with him, trying to reason with a man too far gone, in drink to be reasoned with. I watched from the shadows, too cowardly to intervene, and then Edmund stumbled, fell into the river. I heard the splash. I should have helped, should have done something. Instead, I ran. The confession fell into silence like a stone into still water. Epilogue. Mercy and Justice. A week later, Poirot and I sat in our London rooms, the case of Leonard Braxby, already settling into memory like dust. After a storm, the fire crackled in the grate outside. November rain pelted the windows. Poirot arranged the pieces on his chessboard with mathematical precision, though we had abandoned our game an hour ago. You're still thinking about Thorneberry, I said. May we? The case troubles me, Hastings, not for what we discovered, but for what we chose to do with that discovery. The coroner's inquest had returned a verdict of accidental death. Harold Thorneberry had testified to striking Braxby in a moment of rage, but 3 medical experts, Dr. Keene among them, had agreed that the blow itself was superficial. Braxby had died from the fall, not the assault. Whether he had staggered and fallen of his own accord, or whether someone had assisted his descent remained officially undetermined. Harold had been charged with common assault. Given the provocation, Braxby's blackmail scheme had been thoroughly exposed by Caroline's ledger. The magistrate had imposed a fine and a stern warning. Nothing more. You arranged it, I said. The sympathetic magistrate, the medical testimony. I arranged nothing, Poirot said. His tone suggested otherwise. I merely presented facts. That Harold Thorneberry struck a blow in defense of his wife's honor. This is fact. That the blow did not cause death. This too is fact. According to medical examination, what the magistrate chose to do with these facts. He shrugged. That is beyond my control. Do you believe Harold's account that he left Braxby alive on the bridge? Poirot was silent for a long moment, his fingers stilled on the chest piece. The White King, I noticed. I believe, he said at last, that Harold Thorneberry is a good man who committed violence in a moment of anguish. I believe that Leonard Braxby was a predator who destroyed lives for profit. I believe that justice and law are not always the same thing. Beyond that, he placed the king carefully in its square. Beyond that, Hastings, I believe some questions are better left to a higher power than Hercule Poirot. Margaret Thorneberry had written to thank him. The letter lay on his desk unread. After the first perusal, she had enclosed a check, a substantial sum, which Poirot had returned with a polite note suggesting she donated to charity. Instead, Dr. Keene had also written his letter more complex. He spoke of carrying guilt for 16 years of watching Margaret suffer under false suspicion of his cowardice in remaining silent. Braxby's death, he wrote, had freed him to speak the truth at last. He asked no forgiveness, expected none, but wanted Poirot to know that Harold's mother had died peacefully 2 years after Edmund's drowning, never knowing her secret had been discovered. And Caroline Braxby, I asked what became of her. She inherited her brother's estate. She has sold his London practice and donated half the proceeds to a charity for women and children in distress. The other half she keeps enough to live modestly in the country. She writes that she sleeps better now than she has in years. Happy endings all around then, are they? Poirot looked up, his green eyes holding mine. Harold Thorneberry will carry the memory of that blow until his death. Margaret will wonder always what truly happened on the bridge. Dr. Keene must live with his confession. These are not endings, mon ami. They are merely stopping points in longer stories. But justice was served, I insisted. Was it? Poirot stood, moving to the window. Rain streaked the glass like tears. A man died, Hastings. A wicked man, yes, but a man nonetheless. And we have decided, you and I, and the magistrate, and the coroner, that his death was acceptable, that the world is better without Leonard Braxby than with him. Is that justice, or is it merely expedience? Dressed in moral clothing? You did what was right, I said. Perhaps. He turned back to me, and for the first time since I'd known him, Hercule Poirot looked uncertain. Or perhaps I did what was merciful. The difference between the two, that, my friend, is the true conundrum of Thorneberry, one I suspect I shall never fully solve. The fire burned low. Outside London carried on, indifferent to questions of justice and mercy, of guilt and innocence of the fine lines we draw between right and wrong. Poirot returned to his chessboard and moved the white king into checkmate against itself. Voila, he said softly. Sometimes even the king must fall. Thank you for listening to the Thorneberry Conundrum here on Whispers of the Night. Thank you for your kindness and for being here. I'm excited to read your thoughts about what happened in the story. On your screen now, you'll find 2 more stories I think you'll love. There's so much more waiting for you on the channel. Until next time, stay curious, stay sharp, and may your evenings always be filled with good stories and warm company. This is Davis signing off from Whispers of the Night.